It's always going to be a challenge for pure scientific minds to embrace a non-physical phenomenon while demanding physical proof that it exists.
Thank you so much for joining us for this segment. We would like you, if you don't mind, to like, share, and subscribe when you're done, and don't forget to leave us your comments as well. Do you find your colleagues are more amenable now than ever to discuss the near-death experience as a viable experience?
It's difficult to assess that because the circle of colleagues evolves as you evolve, and pretty soon you find yourself associated with more colleagues that think like you do, and if you're not careful you start to think that the whole world's changing when in reality the only thing that's changing is who you hang out with. It's always going to be a challenge for pure scientific minds to embrace a non-physical phenomenon while demanding physical proof that it exists. Right. And that's the big challenge. It's tantamount to asking a two-dimensional being that lives on a flat piece of paper to draw the shortest distance between point A and B. They may draw a straight line, and that may be the shortest distance in their perspective. And they may even conceive of the idea of folding the paper until points A and B touch and become one point. But they can't actually do the task because they live in a two-dimensional world. And that's part of the dilemma that we have with regards to near-death experiences and life after physical death in general, is we're talking about a non-physical phenomenon, and we're demanding physical proof that it exists. And so that qualification discredits everything non-physical, including people's testimonials and so on and so forth. So I just this year have written a paper about this that will be published in the near future, I hope, looking at how to reconsider what we think of as proof. Mm-hmm. You know, there's scientific proof, but there's also proof, for example, in a court of law can be proven by expert testimony, right? And if you actually look at the studies that have been done, the number of people that have in hospital and out of hospital cardiac arrest, what their survival rates are, what Pim van Lommel, a friend of mine, a cardiologist in the Netherlands, has shown to be the incidence of near-death experience among cardiac arrest survivors. If you look at the number of ICU admissions, patients in the ICU for prolonged periods of stay, and what the known studied percentage of people in that situation that have near-death experiences. If you look at the number of people that attempt suicide and the incidence of near-death experience in people who attempt suicide, you can come up with some interesting calculations, and it's very conservative to say that there is in excess of 1 million people a year in the US alone having near-death experiences.
And that's just the ones that tell, right? Because think about all the ones that are too afraid to say.
Mm-hmm. And as you look at that cumulatively over time, say over a 15-year period, as that number stabilizes with people that are dying and new experiencers and stuff, you're looking at, you know, about 5% of the population have had a near-death experience. Now, it may vary in other parts of the world depending on people's available medical care and their philosophical beliefs about age and death and dying and things like that. But we know that just in the US, in excess of 1 million people a year have near-death experiences. And they're not people whose testimony should be discredited. When you take somebody like Eben Alexander, this is a pure materialist neurosurgeon practicing for a long time in the Harvard system, a highly respected person who believed that consciousness is created by the brain and that ceases with physical death. And yet, after he left the Harvard system, he was in private practice in another hospital when he had his meningoencephalitis, severe bacterial meningoencephalitis, a rare thing for him and his age to get. And they thought that there was so little chance of him surviving that they didn't even do an EEG, I understand, because it wouldn't have made any difference. He was dying, he was dead. And yet when he comes back from his near-death experience, as he regains his health and studies his own medical record and shares it with professional colleagues, he comes to conclude that the profound experience he had while he was unconscious was far too sophisticated to have been created by the brain in its injured state, how badly his brain was injured. And he comes to conclude ultimately that consciousness exists in spite of the brain, not because of it. And in fact, that the brain is a filter that allows us to function in this sphere by tamping down a lot of the things that we might otherwise remember and experience. And one of the things that's so profound about Eben's experience, in my opinion, is he had a guide that led him through his experience. Sounded to me like a beautiful brunette woman. And Eben's adopted. He didn't know that he had a biological sister until months after his NDE. Somebody told him about his biological sister and sent him a picture. And when he saw the picture, he realized that was his guide. Yeah. She was deceased. His biologic sister was already deceased. And that was his guide through his NDE. So this is the question. If you were in a court of law and you were looking for an expert witness on neuropsychiatric function and biology associated with the brain, you would pick somebody like Eben Alexander as your expert witness. Yes, exactly. Now, the fact that he has an NDE is not a reason to discount his expert testimony. And I go through a list of other people and why we shouldn't discount their testimony and stuff. And if you view it from a courtroom kind of a consideration about the number of people that have this experience and the sheer deficiencies of the proposed explanations, physiologic explanations, they talk about anoxic brain injury and neurotransmitter dumping and temporal lobe seizures, and you can go on and on. And Bruce Grayson and Eben Alexander have both gone through that list and explained why those don't adequately explain NDEs. There comes a point when you're talking about millions of witnesses where you have to take a step back and say, wait a minute, when does anecdote become data? Yes. And when should we change the de facto, I shouldn't say de facto, the widely accepted model for death right now is that consciousness is created by the brain and ends at physical death. And we need to change that model because it doesn't explain the data. In a real scientific model, as you collect more data, you have to change the model to address the data that's coming to you. To do otherwise is intellectually dishonest.
You know, there is a model.
There is a model.
In the mental health field, there is a force of psychology called transpersonal psychology that's entire dedicated education and resource is dedicated to altered states of consciousness, to higher states of being. And we study collective consciousness. That is the field. And that there is evidence, and there is an entire group in the mental health field that is dedicated to this. And we talk about not being able to see the proof, but we're starting to see and develop methods where we can actually see the consciousness, the greater consciousness. I mean, think about the consciousness of water. Many people don't know about this, but Dr. Emoto's work, where he speaks to water and the consciousness, well, Veda Austin has taken it to the next level. Veda Austin has been studying the freezing point of water for the last 20 years as a researcher and artist. She puts petri dishes in her freezer. She teaches tens of thousands of people to do this upon the first freezing point of water because it freezes in 3 levels, bottom, top, and middle. The first freezing point, she found that it was imprinting images around the pictures and the words underneath the petri dish. And she started publishing these. And she said, how can water have the consciousness to trace what is underneath? So now there's studies, decades of studies, where people are following up and asking people who are out there on their own. They're writing the word Excalibur under a petri dish and then freeze it at home, and it looks like a sword. It comes out with an image of a sword. She asks the water, she's painting a bird on a painting at her home. She dips the paintbrush in the petri dish in the water, freezes it, and then the water replicates the fantails that she was painting. And she asks the water, "Who are you?" freezes it at the first freezing point, and the words "I am" are in the water. Wow. So this level of understanding and consciousness, and then the research that's going beyond that, is showing us that there are things that we don't understand that are scientifically studied. She's got 2 books about it, just came out with, I think, a 3rd or 4th, well, I mean, I don't even know. And so we're becoming able to have the resources to study this. And the more that practitioners like us, who I lead groups of people through altered states of consciousness through music. And no one can explain why these 2 people over here see a white dog with a red bow on its neck, and they don't understand where it came from, but it's a cute little fluffy dog. And then this man across the circle, who's never met these women, pulls out a picture of his little white dog with a red bow on its neck that passed away the week before. And the whole reason he came to the circle was to connect with his dog. So I just have to say that there is a collective consciousness. It's happening every single time that I get together and work with groups of people. I'm sure it's happening for people that we all work with and see. And if we just had a database to bring it all together, we would be able to find the effective method of studying this and showing that it's absolutely true. And I think the studies with water are a place to start, because nobody in their right mind would ever have believed that water could answer us when we ask it a question.
Well, there's a great movie called What the Bleep that came out about 20 or 25 years ago and talked about the Japanese researcher who
Dr. Emoto.
who started doing the work with water, and it was remarkable.
He did, and this is next level, right? This is like, okay, we take that work. It's not just about the positivity we put into water, but it also seems to have some form of consciousness. Yeah.
Well, and you guys know Dr. Mary Neal very well, and her experience was remarkable. And then to get the information that her son would die, and then, then he does, and then have to deal with that, and to be a woman of science, and then to be submerged in that canoe in the Amazon for as long as she was, and mangled, and then comes out and recounts this experience.
And one thing I might point out about Mary Neal too, you talked about dealing with skeptics earlier, and one thing to be aware is most near-death experiencers that I encounter are not interested in debating or trying to prove their point or make somebody believe something. But I hear skeptics talk about NDE experiencer, why they're writing books and stuff. And Mary's a perfect example of, when she came back, it was on her list. Yeah. You have to write a book. That was one of the things she was told. It wasn't that she wanted to. She put it off as long as she possibly could. I have one friend who was an ER nurse in Pennsylvania, and they had a patient. They brought the guy in. He was in cardiac arrest. He was having a myocardial infarction, and he was unconscious. They were literally doing chest compressions when my friend looked up and saw the individual standing in the corner of the room observing his own resuscitation. And they managed to cram him back into his body and send him up to the ICU.
They didn't have anything to do with that.
And a few days later, my friend went upstairs and had a chat with him in the ICU. He was of German extraction, and he was either Mennonite or another branch of religion, very, very dogmatic, very rigid in his beliefs. Some would say pedantic. And he claimed that when he was out of his body, he met Christ. And he protested to Christ. He said, I did everything I was supposed to do. I read the books. I kept all the rules. And that was what he'd been trained to do. And he said this being that he interpreted to be Christ looked at him and said, it wasn't about the rules. It was about love. And sent him back with the direction to tell that message to everybody and anybody he could, which he did the rest of his life. NDE and near-death experiencers, most of them are not looking to go out and share their story or write a book or win followers or any of that kind of stuff. Often they're directed to do it.